our Fonterra team will be letting our registrations know that we've moved across to YouTube. I'm just going to get my lovely team to send me a link to the YouTube so I can see the chat on the right hand side. Kia ora, welcome to the Farm Source Best Calf Practice Live Q&A. I would really love to know that you're all here along with us because we have a fabulous lineup of guests today that are here, that's jumped across onto the YouTube link. Thank you very much. We're having a little bit of technical trouble there with Livestorm. So whilst I introduce our guests, if you wouldn't mind just letting me know that you're there in the chat, you can hear me okay. And of course, we'll utilize this on the YouTube chat for our questions and answers. So I'll just get that link sent through to me. So as we said, today we're going to be providing you with the chance to ask your questions of our experts, because it's a great time to connect now as you've been dried off by now and heading into, of course, a calving season ahead that's actually seems like ages away, but will be just around the corner in no time. Calf rearing is becoming more and more of a broad subject. A lot of the calf rearing Q&As we've done in the past with Farm Source, huge emphasis on setting up our replacement cows for the future, because of course, so we have to start with the future in mind to produce the best quality cow. But in this particular one as well, we're also going to be talking about setting up our dairy beef calves for their best future as an opportunity for us moving forward on farm. So there's a lot of things to cover off around hygiene and biosecurity, transitioning them slowly, of course, into the shed and then and out into the paddock after weaning as well. So I'd just love to go to our panel. I'm going to start with our very special guest today, if we can bring up on screen, Professor Rebecca Hickson. She is the Dairy Beef Development Manager at Fonterra. Rebecca is a cattle scientist specialising in dairy beef. She's just come to Fonterra actually from Pāmu, with research and expertise spanning the system from bull selection and genetics through rearing to finishing and meat quality. There's a lot. I've just got to do a little plug in the Dairy Exporter, all about dairy beef. And of course, we've highlighted a lot of Rebecca's research and work. So when it comes to setting up our dairy beef calves, Rebecca's going to be right here for all your questions. Known to many of you, we're going now to our senior vet for Fonterra, Mike Shalcris. A lot of you will know Mike from a lot of the previous Calf Week events and works really closely with the Fonterra On-Farm Excellence team. Lots of great calf rearing guides and videos that are up online with Mike, so welcome. And Carla Rawson, you have to be kind on Carla. She's hasn't been too well, but joining us from home, National Sales Manager for NZ AgBiz. Everything to know about calf milk replacer. She's reared over 4 million calves by herself over the past 6 years. That's incredible, Carla. So let's just say she knows a thing or two about rearing calves. That's for sure. So I'm just going to head over here and double check that I have got a link sent over to me. Claudia, if you wouldn't mind sending me that YouTube link, then I can at least see your chat. So, because I would love to know where you're all watching from around the country this lunchtime. So if you want to put in the chat, what location are you in at the moment? I'd love to read through and see that you can hear me as well. Okie dokie, I'm just double checking that there. That's wonderful. Make sure I'm on mute so I don't hear myself back. That's always a good trick. Look at this. Oh, good. Thank you, Jude and Chelsea, for letting me know that we're all up and running, and Paul's talking in from Pukekohe. So, yes, we'll leave that other link there if we can communicate with those that are across there in the live storm. So my name is Sarah Perriam-Lamp. Proud to be here today. Best practice calf rearing is what we're talking about. Before we get into this awesome topic, I have to make sure that you are well aware, you may have skipped over the details at registration, that if you are watching, you are in the draw to win multiple different prizes for the amazing Country Mile brand and the NZ AgBiz calf products as well. We've got lots of calf milk replacement products in terms of prizes. We've got prebiotics. We've got all sorts of things there that you can go on the win, and even some Ecolab products as well, I understand. So all of the information on that will be in your registration. Right, let's cut straight to the chase, and we're going to go to our seasoned live streamer, Michael Shalcris. Michael, welcome. For those who don't know you, a little bit of a brief on your day-to-day role.
Oh, yeah. Hi there, Sarah. G'day, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us here. So I'm a veterinary program manager in the on-farm excellence animals team within FarmSource. So that's trying to kind of look at what is good farming practice and how can we help support farmers to kind of improve standards of care for their animals on farm. In relation to this topic, it's how can we ensure that our calves are reared in a way that they are able to turn into the best adult animals kind of at the end of that. So best dairy cows or best beef animals.
Fantastic. And coming over to you, Carla, getting warmed there by your beautiful Aga I can see behind you. How long have you been rearing to rear 6 million calves? Let's start there. Oh, we've just got Carla on mute. Is that... Can we hear
Here
the...
we go.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, how long have you been rearing calves, Carla?
I'd have to give away my age, Sarah. that might be sensitive information.
Oh, and what's your day-to-day role within NZ AgBiz and supporting our farmers and our rearers?
I work in the sales team for NZ AgBiz, so the main focus for our team is to support our retailers and our farmers, ensure they get a really good understanding of our products and how to get the best out of them. So a real big focus is in training people in the stores as well as supporting farmers on farm with best practice advice.
Coming to you next, but we're just wanting to say hello to Katie in Taranaki, Ella in Tolaga Bay, Natalia in the Manawatu, and Vanessa in Cambridge, as well as Alicia in Ngatea. Great parts of the world. Thank you so much. Oh, and Julie's joining us from Porirua, so some great places there. Now, of course, our very special guest is Professor Rebecca Hickson. Rebecca, we'd love to know your history and how you've come to your role in Fonterra. Can you give us a little brief?
Well, I'd better start with, I grew up in Tolaga Bay, so
there you go.
Tolaga Bay. I have spent the last 15 years at Massey doing various research in dairy beef, particularly around, how can we make better use of this amazing opportunity of surplus calves coming out of the dairy industry that, we can make a really good beef product out of. And then the last couple of years I've been at Focus Genetics, which is a subsidiary of Pāmu, looking at their opportunities for their beef breeding program and in particular their dairy beef program.
I suppose if we're going to start in chronological order, and particularly we've got to focus here today on dairy beef, Rebecca, can you just set the scene for our calf rearers watching and listening, the importance around how far it goes back for the dairy farmer on genetic selection with dairy beef?
So there's a big opportunity in dairy beef to use particularly our lower end dairy cows who we didn't want a replacement from anyway, to get a high quality beef calf out of. So because there's an opportunity to use AI in dairy, there's access to some really, really good genetics. And we know that, putting in a good bull versus putting in an average bull can put an extra 60 kilograms carcass weight on the hogs, or take, 13 days off days to weaning in the milk feeding phase. And, every calf rearer I know would be quite keen to have calves that reach weaning weight 13 days earlier. So, yes, bull selection is where it starts really for dairy beef.
And we'll discuss a lot around the opportunities for calf rearers and where that pinch point lies as you discuss. But Michael, I mean, we are now at the early June. It does feel like it could be a long time away in terms of shed preparation, those calves hitting the ground and coming into the sheds. But I mean, thinking about things now is so crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for some parts of the country, calving's only 6 weeks away, so it's going to come around pretty quick. I think the Yeah, in terms of setting yourself up for success, the sooner you can do things like prepare your calf sheds, the sooner you're going to, the more time you've got to fix any problems that you might identify then. But the other thing I think is really worth thinking about, particularly this year, is your calving paddock selections and trying to match those to your expected calving spread, because we've had nationally a really big improvement in reproductive performance in the dairy herd over the last season, and um, that is going to result in a material impact to people's calving spreads, and that will mean you've got more calves early on average, and you're going to need more feed early on for the calves and for the cows. And if you keep doing the same thing that you've been doing for the last 10 years, then you may find that you run out of feed sooner than you anticipated. So I would really encourage people not just to do the physical planning around setting their calf sheds up, but do the the planning on paper. Recheck your feed budget. Make sure you've actually allocated enough space for calving paddocks, because you may find you chew through them too quickly.
Well, great advice, Michael. When we're talking about shed hygiene, are we the fundamentals of setting up sheds? It's a learning experience every single year, and you sort of have always hoped to have written it down around what you'd do differently. What are you seeing some of the most efficient and great hygiene sheds do?
Yeah, we probably all learned a bit more about disease control over the last few years, and the idea that if something is dirty, you cannot disinfect it. So if you're you've got some shitty walls in your shed and you're spraying them disinfectant, it's actually not going to achieve anything. You need to clean those surfaces first, but also anything that gets that touches those dirty surfaces is now also dirty and can spread infection to the next pen or to the next calf. And so it's thinking, how can I structure my shed? How can I manage my processes in a way that reduces the chance of me touching a sick animal and then going and touching a well animal, or the equipment that I'm using, the calf feeder, or the bucket that you're carrying hard feed around in, or something like that, your boots, all of those things. How can you avoid those touching sick animals, or being near sick animals, and then being near healthy animals? Calves are kind of naturally have high levels of bacteria that they shed. It's usually not a problem. Sometimes it is. When it is, it's around how do you. I quite liked the analogy that was used at a Palmer Open Day kind of late last year, that the country is an island, so we've got biosecurity around the borders of the country. If you now think of your farm as an island, you need to have biosecurity controls around your farm. Your shed is an island, biosecurity. There's another opportunity to put a layer of control around there. Each pen provides another border that you can strengthen, and then each animal is an island in and of itself.
Great analogy. I'll just stay with you there, Michael. I mean, we've in the prize pack, we know we've got some of those Ecolab products, the Viricid, the Kenocox, some of those things like coccidiosis and rotavirus are not very nice at all. And I just wanted to pick up on some of the questions that have come in prior to the Q&A. One wants to know just about, how often should you be spraying the shed, and that pre and during?
Yeah, so you can't disinfect a turd is a pithy way of saying this. That if something's dirty, just spraying it with the disinfectant will act on the surface of the dirt, but whatever's trapped underneath, it won't impact that. So more important than spraying disinfectants around is actually cleaning hard surfaces and designing your shed so that it can be cleaned. If you've got a shed that's made up of, it's all rough sawn timber, it's pretty hard to disinfect that. If it's got solid partitions, it's often is easier to kind of scrub down. But all of that is hard work during calving season, and probably in most cases is only a marginal gain. So you'd probably better off putting your energy into better other biosecurity practices. So keeping your clothes and your equipment clean, cleaning your calf feeder properly, not just a little bit, but properly with hot water and disinfectant. Not storing calf milk in a grubby 200-litre drum that's it's got flies floating on the top and stuff like that. Those are all things that you could spend your time and energy improving those practices. Don't worry about spraying virucidals around most of the time. Now, in terms of when the bedding gets wet and shitty, top it up. Don't think that you can disinfect it.
Rebecca, you've had a lot of commercial experience in calf rearing. How important is that shed preparation and some advice from your learnings?
One thing I will say is once it's full of calves and you're flat out, so your opportunity to do things and get things right is first. And once you've got problems in your shed and you've got sick calves, the more sick calves you've got, the busier you are. And so getting it right to begin with is a heck of a lot easier than trying to fix it up afterwards.
Great advice, Carla.
Sorry. Can you hear me, Sarah?
Yes, we can hear you. You're just with regards to that importance and what you've seen in the past and some really excellent examples of shed hygiene and preparation.
I think most of the big rearers now are very thorough. They understand that if you get your shed set up well, you've got good ventilation, you've got the right amount of calves per pen, you've got nice, clean, dry facilities. It does make a real difference. And I really have to reiterate what Michael said, like every pen needs to be treated like an island, and everybody needs to be very careful, like wearing gloves even if you can, to ensure that you aren't passing bugs around the shed, because as we know, as once the bugs start spreading, it does become a lot of hard work for everybody. One sick calf is one too many. So if we can take the time at the beginning and get it right on hygiene, I think it makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Carla. I know you haven't been too well and you're struggling to chat to us, so thank you very, very much. I'll go light on the questions to you, but fabulous. I'm just wanting to jump in here and quickly say hi to our other guest. Pauline is talking to us, jumping in here from Northland. Charlotte from South Canterbury, welcome. I'd love if you have in the chat, what particular parts of calf rearing you're most interested in. Are you dairy farming and rearing yourself? Are you a rearer standalone? Are you interested more in dairy beef and the requirements that dairy beef calves may need in comparison to set them up for finishing? So fire away on some questions there in the YouTube chat as well. Colostrum. Michael, we talk about colostrum every single time because it is the absolute most important thing. The most fascinating thing I learned recently, Michael, was that a cow is the only mammal that doesn't pass good bacteria through in vitro to the calf like others. So it's so crucial.
Yeah, there's a clever phrase around that as well about, it's unfortunate that the cow is the only species that does this. Now, what it means, if you look at all the other mammalian species, the mother will pass some immunity through to the offspring prior to birth, but in cattle, just the way that their placenta is formed, it doesn't happen. So calves are unique in that colostrum is the only way that they can start to build their immune system or speed up the development of their immune system shortly after birth. So you can talk to farmers who've done a good job with their colostrum management, and those calves can be standing in reasonably dirty conditions, and they still don't see signs of disease. So it is really important that good first milking colostrum, that's the gold colostrum, the stuff that we, is so precious, that is what gets into the calf, quickly, in the right quantity. What else have we got?
Quality.
And quality, and squeaky clean. So it is really important, and I don't think it can be over emphasized or overly discussed. If you look at how colostrum is managed in non-seasonal systems overseas, it's treated with the kind of reverence and preciousness that it deserves, which is that individual cows' colostrum is collected into at least a very clean, if not sterile, container, and then refrigerated or frozen or stored in some way that keeps its quality, and then is given to the calves when they need it. It's a more complicated picture in New Zealand because of how many cows and calves are left together for sometimes over 24 hours, and so it's harder, can be harder for farmers to know whether or not a calf has had enough colostrum, and that's kind of where the recommendation is to be be cautious and just treat all the calves if they need colostrum. But yeah, there's a big difference in quality between that first milking colostrum and all other transition milk. So it is ideally every farm would have a system for segregating that first milking colostrum, and only keeping the really good stuff together.
Interesting here, Alicia is coming to calf rearing for her first year from working with pigs, Michael. So I'm sure she's probably learnt something interesting there with regards to how different cows are, Alicia. Now coming to you, Rebecca, what is best practice at scale that you've been doing in terms of colostrum management?
Well, so I come at it from a slightly different perspective, where as a commercial rearer, calves enter the facility at 4 days old. So that horse is bolted by the time I'm picking them up. But I will say I certainly notice differences between different lines of calves in terms of their robustness. And I would, if the dairy beef industry and this pressure on calf rearing, we want calf rearing capacity to grow. So it's important that dairy farmers are taking care of their beef sale calves as if they were replacements. And if they do all the things for those beef calves that they're doing for their replacements, then those calves will go on into the rearing facilities as good, strong calves.
Have you got research to show or anecdotal experience in just the difference of how well that calf would do with good colostrum at the start versus not?
Yes, there is. And essentially it translates to a greatly increased risk of death, obviously, if a calf hasn't had colostrum, but also just early growth can be impacted as well. So, colostrum really it's essential.
It's the gold. Absolutely. And of course, Carla would definitely back that up as well. Let's just so we've got the colostrum into them within the first 24 hours, Michael. We've got our shed set up with our bedding and our house and our disinfectant done. So in terms of those feeding options, what's the next step to transition as soon as they come into the sheds, and in both scenarios, both in a dairy situation as well as a 4-day-old scenario as well, if you're freshly getting them from the dairy farm?
Was that for me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You take the dairy side.
This is a really interesting topic, because this is what calf rearers often want to talk about. What's the best way to rear a calf or to feed a calf? And it really depends on the different factors at play on your farm, and what's the structure of, are you rearing your own replacements? Are you rearing replacements for someone else? Are you rearing dairy beef? Those all impact the time and resource pressures that you're able to devote to these calves. The historical kind of driver behind calf rearing on dairy farms has been, let's get these calves weaned off milk as quickly as possible, and kind of get them to that point with as little time invested as necessary, and that is helpful in the short term. It means that you're spending fewer hours rearing calves, and you're preserving as much milk for sale as possible, or minimizing milk replacer. What that doesn't take into account is the potential long-term benefits of actually feeding those calves really, really well. That what are you setting these calves up for? If they're going to come back into a dairy herd, then you want them to be coming back as well-grown heifers, who are kind of have finished most of their growing, and are well prepared to enter into the dairy herd, and then getting calf again for their second calving. And in the dairy beef space, you want them to be growing well right from birth, not suffering any growth checks, and again, when they're weaned off milk, not getting a growth check then as well. So increasingly over the last probably 20 years, we're seeing research coming out saying the long-term benefits for calf rearing come from increased milk feeding. So rather than going, how little milk can we get away with and the calves are still alive, it's saying, what is the benefit to feeding more and more and more and more milk? And there will be a trade-off at some point, but the kind of conventional wisdom around calf rearing, I think, is probably due for a bit of an update to just say, hey, look, a higher milk feeding system gives you better animals in the longer term.
And Rebecca, thinking about it from a beef system, from the colostrum, but even in terms of milk allowance, that calf is naturally getting what it needs from its mother in a beef system naturally as well. So when you put a dairy beef cross, are we not feeding these calves as much as they need for their genetics as well?
So I think there are a number of ways we can look at that. So I'll pull that back to, firstly, the transitions. So there's three major transitions in a dairy beef calf's life. So the first one happens at about 4 days when it goes into the rearing shed. And some of those calves are transported a long way. Some of those calves go via a sale yard. So it can be a really high stress point for those calves and open up those calves to suffer a disease check and a growth check at that point. And the diet transition is pretty significant if they're coming from colostrum straight onto calf milk replacer as well. The next transition for them is from a milk diet to typically a meal and pasture diet. And so, that needs to be managed, considering the age of the calf, considering the meal intake of the calf, and considering the weight of the calves. And each of those on their own don't tell enough of the story. You actually need to put all three together and say, is this calf going to carry on growing when I wean it? And then there's a third major transition for them, which is the 100-kilo calf leaving the calf rearing operation and going out to its finishing environment. And, we call them weaners, which is potentially a bit of a misnomer, because, the beef calf, by comparison, stays on its mum till it's 200 plus kilos. And, they grow really well, the beef calf, through that period. And typically eating really poor quality pasture, because we keep our beef cows, their job is to clean up poor quality pasture. So they get the worst of the worst in late summer, but their calf at foot still tends to grow pretty well. And the difference is that those calves are being topped up with some really high quality milk from mum. And so when we take this 100-kilo calf and put it into hill country, we need to respect that it is still a baby, and that it, really should have still been on mum. And so we need to provide it with a high quality diet at that point. And high quality doesn't necessarily mean milk. And, you know, for most systems, milk would make no sense in that scenario, but it needs to be, you know, the highest quality we can put into it. And farmers are having lots of success with lucerne, with, you know, chicory, white clover type crops, or even just supplementing with meal. So managing that calf through the 100 to 200 kilos is something that we need to work on in the dairy beef space, because we need to set those calves up better at the end of their first autumn so that they can then grow for the rest of their life.
Yeah, really valid point there. Just taking a step back with regards to a question that came through about a lot of people considering more ad lib feeding based on what you've just said. What's your thoughts on that in the calf shed in terms of ad lib feeding systems?
For a dairy replacement heifer, it sounds fabulous. For a, maybe Mike's got a different view, so I'll let him comment on that. But from a dairy beef perspective, I have seen some operations that do that, and their calves are magnificent. You would want to look carefully at your economics, would be the caveat that I'd place around that.
Interesting. Michael?
Yeah, I think that is a great way of summarising a lot of aspects of calf rearing, which are the compromises that you make and the different drivers in different situations, and in particular with regard to economics, that you can make a gold-plated calf rearing operation, but if it's unaffordable to run, then it's not going to survive. And so it is just going. Calf rearing involves lots of different compromises. It's important to understand the implications of them all before you make them, because then you know which risks you're taking and which one, what you might need to keep an eye on. Is it the bank balance? Is it the risk of disease? Is it I don't know, the rate of growth, that kind of thing. The ad lib feeding is probably a good way to go from the calf's perspective, assuming that the feeding process that you use involves clean milk. So, making one of those drums with lots of teats on it, you just fill it up and the calves drink as much as they want, and then you top it up, and then you top it up, and then you top it up. You're going to end up with dirty milk in there. That's ultimately going to have a negative effect potentially on disease rates. So it's remembering that there's ad lib feeding and there's ad lib feeding, and then there are you can get kind of mechanical ad lib feeders. There's a more complicated device there, but they're still reasonably simple. It's a drum and calves can drink as much as they want from it. And then there are super expensive, complicated ad lib feeders that will weigh the calves and will, you can apportion, record how much each one is drinking, which helps you identify sick ones early. Like it's an interesting, exciting space. But yeah, if you think about what does a calf do if it's on its mum, it's probably drinking 10 or 12 litres a day. So if you're feeding less than 10 or 12 litres a day, you're making a compromise. And that compromise is in the volume that the calf is getting to drink, which will mean it doesn't grow as quickly as it would if it was on its mum.
Carla, one of the operations I saw was an automatic ad lib feeder with calf milk replacer. Are you see in terms of the milk allowance, making sure that they're getting its, that gold-plated standard, but in terms of how much the economics would stack up with calf milk replacer, how much more milk powder are you using in a situation like that potentially?
The literature review that we've just recently had done by Dr. Kirsty Stellwagen is actually probably worth sharing with the people that are on the call after the webinar is complete. But I think historically people have fed around 10% of a calf's body weight. But the research that Michael's referring to on a higher milk allowance is about 20% of a calf's body weight. So for a 40 kg calf, that's 8 litres of milk. In the trials that were done with ad lib feeding systems, in comparison, the calves actually would drink more and 8 litres a day. So it's quite a lot of milk. To Rebecca's point, I suppose, when you're managing economics, it does it does stack up to be quite a large amount of milk. But on 20% of a calf's body weight, calves grow well. And in that first 4 to 6 weeks of a calf's life, where their rumen is developing, but they're relying on the milk as their source of nutrition, it's really important that you're feeding them enough. From a dairy, like a heifer replacement point of view, the sorry, the tissue that's found in the udder that produces milk, parenchyma, I think I'm saying that correctly, actually is showing that if you're feeding a good milk allowance in those early stages, you're going to see more of that tissue in the udder. Even if the udder's around the same size, there will be more of the parenchyma tissue in calves that are fed a higher milk allowance. In terms of, you also get a bigger framed cow, so it's also important because a bigger framed cow has a bigger gut, which equals more milk production. In terms of the dairy beef, I understand what Rebecca's saying. There was one trial that was done where you were seeing like feeding a good milk allowance, like a higher milk allowance versus low milk allowance. Also, solid feed was an important component of this trial, but the calves that were fed a higher milk allowance, they did get to the 460 kg slaughter weight faster. So that was around 10 to 33 days faster. And also to Rebecca's point, I think she's talking about getting to weaning weight, getting the calves weaned earlier. If you can feed a good milk allowance, you will get to weaning weight faster. I think the key at that point is how you transition them from the milk onto solid feed. They will obviously be eating solid feed throughout the time they've been on milk, but you want to ensure that you step down the milk. So ideally drop around 20 to 25% over a sort of 3 days at a time. So drop 25% in the first 3 days and then another until you take them completely off milk, and it will allow them to adjust from the higher milk allowance onto solid feed without losing any of the gains that you've made from all the hard work earlier in the process.
That's really fascinating, and I'm sure that we can circulate out that research and a link to the registrants afterwards. Rebecca, I've got some questions here. I'll come to your questions shortly as well that carry on this. But you talked about those different transition points and the checkpoints that can happen. What happens if you're buying 4-day-old calves from a dairy farm that is feeding, whole cow's milk until 4 days, and then you put them on calf milk replacer? Is there anything there in terms of continuation of what they've been on, or like if you had your hands on the whole process, what would be ideal?
Ideally you don't make rapid, sudden adjustments to a calf's diet at any point, and especially when they're 4 days old. That's especially rough. So if possible, getting hold of some cow's milk to assist with that transition is a great option. It's not always possible, in which case, managing volumes, giving some electrolytes, making sure the transition, the moving process is as stress-free as possible, all helps to just, anything you can do to not knock that calf around any more than you have to helps.
Yeah, great advice. Michael, I just wanted to talk wider around dairy beef, and also at some point too, just around any updates this year from MPI. But why is Fonterra, helping support rearers in the dairy beef space in this topic?
Yeah, the for those dairy farmers out there, you hopefully be aware that from kind of the start of last year, so a year ago, Fonterra changed our terms of supply to say we don't want people killing calves on farm if there's a alternative economic option for them. So, in most cases, that's bobbying pet food or rearing for other purposes. This is I guess, a wider social license risk for the dairy industry that the public, in general, people in general don't like the idea of killing young calves, and kind of public acceptance of killing of cattle goes way up once the cattle are a year old. Like it's kind of has been found around the world. It's interesting, and so if we want our calves to be entering a value stream, there's a and we want it to happen quickly. Fonterra needs to be supporting rearers and dairy beef around the country to increase the options that are available to our suppliers.
And Rebecca, when you were at Pāmu have set a target by 2030 to rear all of their dairy calves, and dairy beef is a big part of Pāmu's mission. Now you're at Fonterra. How possible is that, and what is your role going to be in Fonterra with that?
So my role at Fonterra is around developing the calf rearing for dairy beef, so making it easier and more functional for more calves to be reared, because right now, there's a real pinch point in the supply chain that says we just don't have the rearing capacity to send more calves this way. In terms of how possible is it, when you say it's nearly 2 million calves that we're not using beyond 4 days old at the moment, it feels big and it feels hard. I sort of take the approach, well, how do you eat an elephant? A teaspoon at a time. So for lots of farms, there is an opportunity to do something a bit differently, and it's probably a different thing on lots of those farms. And what are the easiest next steps to take? So for me, it's less about going, how do we get to zero? It's about what are the opportunities, because there are lots of really good calves currently going on bobby trucks that we should be capturing in the industry. So for me, it's about, what are the next things we can do.
And those watching, Rebecca, are really interested in, the fundamentals of how to raise beef versus, dairy beef versus straight dairy calves. Things like, are they needed to be indoors longer, more milk, et cetera, et cetera. How should we treat the improvements in our calf rearing, do you believe? What are some of those fundamentals? We've been over a couple of them, but from your perspective.
I think fundamentally a dairy calf is not different from a beef calf or a beef cross dairy calf. What is different is the economics and the long-term, fate of that calf. So for a dairy heifer, we're setting her up for a long productive life of a milking cow, whereas for a dairy beef calf, ideally we don't want that animal to live past 18 months of age, and we want it to be well grown and delicious at that point. So we are trying to get slightly different things, and we have different economic drivers. So I think the equation for feeding a dairy heifer calf more milk and for longer is easier to make stack up than for a beef calf. And some of those things will, the movement of animals through the supply chain in the dairy beef industry makes a lot of that harder, that often the calf rearer is rearing calves that they might sell, in the store market at 100 kilos. And so whether they've reared them well or not, they're a 100-kilo calf, and there's no extra reward for that. So in a model where, there's connections between the person putting in the good genetics, the calf rearer rearing the calves well, and the finisher getting the benefit from that, then it makes more sense. And so building some of those relationships where, if we can get better reward in terms of finishing performance from those calves, we need to have that connection that says, I want to buy the calves that have the better finishing performance.
Yeah, there's a lot more to do beyond the weight of the wheel being on the rearer themselves in that discussion. I'd love a couple more questions to come through before we wrap up. But Carla, your thoughts on this, the size and the scale, the elephant, as Rebecca explained, we have the ability, the knowledge and the skill within the industry to do this, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure Rebecca's, I think, talking to a lot of the big rearers themselves. I'd like, this support and additional focus, I think, is, sorry, will be really, really appreciated. Yeah. Just on going back a little bit, I'm sorry, but on one point, just on the colostrum to milk replacer transition, because this is a bit of a challenging thing for a lot of farmers, if you do have access to colostrum/transition milk, if you can combine the two, and like I think Michael and Rebecca have talked to, try and do the transition as slowly as you can, depending on how much colostrum and transition milk. It will ensure that the calves do transition over a lot easier. It minimises the stress. So if you take out a litre of colostrum and transition milk and put in a litre of CMR and do that over the course of a few days, you'll find the transition a lot easier. We have a number of rearers also using our probiotic BioSupport. That's made at the Fonterra Microfermentation Unit down in Palmerston North. It's got a lot of research, a lot of it actually in humans, that shows its beneficial effects for gut health and well-being. So a lot of calf rearers have found, especially in that first 10 days when the calves are sort of going through quite a few changes, it just really sets them up for success. So that might be something as well to help with that transition, especially if you don't have access to the colostrum and transition milk on a calf rearing unit.
For those like Alicia who are in their first year contract milking, can you just explain, Michael, transition milk and that whole process when you're on farm?
Yeah, so the technically colostrum only refers to that very first milking post calving, and then after that, it tends to be called transition milk, and this is, I guess, as the udder changes from making that really immune fortified syrupy colostrum to give the calf to transfer the immunity right at the start, through to making kind of milk, normal milk. And there's kind of people say, colostrum's not milk, and that's you're selling milk, so that's why we've got this food safety kind of requirement that cows are kept out of supply for the first 8 milkings, so that first colostrum milk, which isn't milk, doesn't end up in supply. Also to manage antibiotic residues and allow cows a bit more time to transition cleanly. But for people like Alicia, if she's got questions, get in touch. Farm Source has got a bunch of people whose job it is to help farmers do stuff and learn stuff, and so that's why we do these webinars. It's why we have TSRs. It's why we have people in regions who can come and talk to you about these sorts of things. So definitely take advantage of the support that's out there.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Well said. And Alicia, we're picking on Alicia, if she's still watching, every single one I do, I learn something else. I didn't know that there was transition milk was 8 milking. So, that's incredible. And there's the extra supply there for the calves. I've got some good questions coming through. Charlotte, is there, who am I going to put this one to? Let's go to Rebecca. Is there any truth that faster flowing teats are not as good for the calf's digestive system as it was thought, and that fast flowing teats can also mean that more calves suckling on other calves?
I'm going to deflect this one to either of you other two.
Michael?
I have
Okay,
heard that. So the ideal teat flow is 2 to 3 minutes per litre. So there's a few things with your feeder you need to consider, like ensuring it's set up about 65 centimetres from the ground. Ideally, you want the feeder to be around the same height as the cow's udder, and you want the flow rate to be around that for optimal digestion, because that will ensure the esophageal groove works correctly, but also the sucking motion helps the salivary enzymes. Michael might be able to talk more on what that actually does in terms of the digestion process, but there has been trial work showing that actually shows that that also helps with the curding, because you can use a high quality milk replacer like Ancalf that's guaranteed to curd, but you want all the other components working correctly too. There has also been trial work that's showing if the calf does drink slower, there's less suckling on other calves in the pen.
While you're on there, Carla, question specifically for you. Can you just mention what that probiotic is again for Ella, who wants to give it a go for dairy beef calf rearing this year?
So it's called BioSupport, and it's a probiotic. So the difference between a probiotic and a prebiotic is the probiotic is putting in good bacteria. So the particular probiotic that's in BioSupport is Bifidobacterium animalis. A prebiotic like what we have in Ancalf, like it's called Actogen, is more like a sticky sugar, and it helps rid gram-negative pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella attached to the Actogen molecules rather than the gut wall. So in simple terms, the probiotics putting in the good bacteria, the prebiotics helping get rid of some pathogens.
Fantastic. I'll come to you, Michael. Nikki from Oaktree Hunger wants to know if you are unable to feed these larger amounts of milk and your calves start eating the meal well, given the calves are weaned off the meal very slowly before leaving the farm to go grazing, what should the maximum amount of kilos of meal be per calf?
That is a great question. No one's ever asked about maximum meal. They always ask
Maximum.
about minimum meal. Yeah.
Minimum.
Yeah. The assuming they're on pasture, they should be able to regulate their intake reasonably well, as long as there's like enough fibrous feed, because that will be the risk is that you don't feed enough fiber in their diet, and so you compromise rumen function there. Now, if they've made the adjustment slowly, that's less of a risk. But most farmers would go, I'm spending too much money on meal, I'm going to cut. Like the money will be the limiting factor rather than what the calf can actually consume. I don't know if that actually helps. Rebecca, have you got any thoughts on the most meal a calf could eat?
They'd probably struggle to eat more than 2 or 3 while they're sub 100 kilos, but a big calf could eat enough to make himself crook or make the farmer's budget pretty crook. The only thing I would say is, like putting in more meal, don't do that suddenly. So if you've got calves who are used to eating 1 kilo or 1.5 kilos and you decide you're a bit short of feed, don't suddenly allow them to eat a great deal more. Do it slowly.
Yeah, good idea. They're a bit like a Labrador. They'll just eat if it's in front of them. Speaking from a Labrador owner's experience. Thank you very, very much. There's so many things, and as we always say, that we could continue talking for hours within a live Q&A around calf rearing. So many questions potentially coming in. Just Nikki said, yes, the cows would be out in the paddock with hay without fail plus water. Good on you, Nikki. So thank you very much for joining us over your lunch break. Thank you for your patience with regards to our small technical difficulty there at the start. And of course, we will have this cut up, edited, and created as both podcast and a video for watching back on demand. But as Michael said there, Farm Source is there to support you every step of the way. And so, of course, go in store, talk to your local TSR, reach out to the experts, head on to the website. There's a huge amount of calf rearing videos, tips and tricks that you can dive into. But it's interesting, the research is always evolving, the learning's always evolving. So every time you see one of these webinars, pop in to see if there's any refreshed information as well. Thank you very much for taking the time. Head to nzfarmsource.co.nz, and of course, as you're registered, you may just get a nice little email pop into your inbox to say congratulations, you won a prize. So thank you so much for taking the time to come along on your lunch break. Enjoy.